In a galaxy where humans are dismissed as primitive backwater dwellers, where ancient civilizations measure their worth in millennia and technological supremacy, one species made a fatal assumption. They believed that youth meant weakness, that simplicity meant inferiority, and that a mere 3 centuries of space travel could never challenge empires that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They were about to learn why assumptions can shatter entire civilizations. When the Hegemony Council gathered to discuss the human problem, they saw only numbers, a single star system, primitive fusion drives, and laughably basic weapons. What they failed to see was the one thing that had carried humanity from caves to cosmos in the blink of an evolutionary eye: the terrifying power of human adaptability, ingenuity, and the absolute refusal to surrender when cornered. This is the story of how one underestimated human named Marcus Chun became the catalyst that would forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. This is the story of how the hunters became the hunted, and how the oldest lesson in the universe was taught once again. Never corner a species that climbed to the top of its food chain by refusing to die quietly. The galaxy was about to meet humanity's greatest weapon. Not technology, not numbers, but the indomitable human spirit wrapped in flesh that simply would not break. Marcus Chun pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the space station's maintenance corridor, his breathing carefully controlled despite the chaos erupting around him. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the distant sound of plasma fire echoed through the ventilation shafts. His mission had gone sideways in the worst possible way, but that was nothing new for a human operating in hegemony space. The mining station Kepler 442b orbited a gas giant deep in a Vortex sector, officially listed as an automated mineral extraction facility. Unofficially, Marcus had discovered it was something far more sinister: a processing center where captured humans were being experimented on by the hegemony's biological research division. The intelligence that had led him here came from a rescued human scientist who had managed to escape 3 months ago, her mind barely intact after what they had done to her. Marcus checked his equipment one more time. His weapon was a modified human pulse rifle, enhanced with salvaged hegemony technology, a hybrid that shouldn't exist according to galactic law, but humans had never been particularly good at following rules they hadn't helped write. His armor was similarly cobbled together, human engineering combined with alien alloys in ways that made traditional military analysts scratch their heads. It worked, though, and in the field, that was all that mattered. The station held approximately 200 human prisoners, taken during the so-called research expeditions that the hegemony had been conducting in human space for the past 2 years. These expeditions were barely disguised raids, striking isolated human colonies and research outposts, taking prisoners under the pretense of xenobiological study permits that the human government had never actually signed. The hegemony counted on humanity's relative weakness in space to prevent any meaningful retaliation. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. Marcus had infiltrated the station by stowing away on a supply transport, spending 18 hours in a cargo container barely large enough for his body. The discomfort was irrelevant. He had endured worse during his military training on Earth, and the stakes here were too high for personal comfort to matter. Every hour the prisoners remained in hegemony hands was another hour of torture, another chance for the aliens to learn something about human physiology that could be used against his entire species. The station's complement consisted of 37 Vortex researchers and security personnel. The Vortex were an insectoid species, roughly humanoid but with 4 arms and exoskeletons that made them naturally armored. They were older than humanity by several millennia, and they viewed humans the way humans might view particularly interesting laboratory mice. Their technology was undeniably superior. Plasma weapons, advanced shields, faster-than-light communication systems that humanity was still struggling to understand. What they lacked was imagination. Marcus had spent the first 6 hours after his arrival mapping the station's layout, and identifying key personnel. The Vorthack operated on rigid hierarchical principles, with each individual having a specific role that they rarely deviated from. The security chief, a large Vorthack named Thektar, followed the same patrol route every 2 hours with mathematical precision. The research director, Dr. Zilthak, conducted prisoner examinations according to a schedule that hadn't varied in weeks. This predictability was their weakness. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Marcus would disable the station's communication array first, preventing them from calling for help. Then, he would systematically eliminate the security forces while avoiding the research areas where the prisoners were held. Finally, he would take control of the station's transport shuttle and evacuate the humans. It was a plan that relied heavily on the Vorthack's underestimation of human capabilities and their inability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. The communication array was located in the station's upper section, accessible through a maintenance shaft that the Vorthack had designed for their smaller maintenance drones. They had never considered that a human might use it, primarily because they believed humans lacked the technical knowledge to navigate their systems. Marcus had spent months studying captured Vorthack technology, learning their interfaces and protocols through a combination of human ingenuity and old-fashioned reverse engineering. As he crawled through the narrow shaft, Marcus reflected on the broader situation that had led him here. Humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel just 3 centuries ago, making them relative newcomers to the galactic community. The established powers, the Vorthack hegemony, the Crystalline Collective, the Plasma Lords, had initially treated humanity with the casual indifference reserved for primitive species that would either destroy themselves or be absorbed into larger empires within a few generations. That indifference had shifted to concern when humans proved surprisingly adaptable to alien technology. Where other species required generations to master new technological paradigms, humans seemed to instinctively understand the underlying principles and began modifying them almost immediately. This flexibility was seen as dangerous by species that had spent millennia perfecting their traditional approaches. The concern had become hostility when human colonies began appearing in disputed territories, established by independent groups that ignored the complex territorial agreements that govern galactic politics. Humans didn't seem to understand that certain systems were off-limits, certain resources were reserved for specific species, and certain technologies were not meant for young civilizations. They simply saw empty space and resources that could support human life, and they moved in with the casual confidence of a species that had never met a frontier it couldn't cross. Marcus reached the communication array and began his work. Vorthack technology relied heavily on bioneural interfaces, systems that responded to specific neural patterns and electromagnetic signatures. Humans weren't supposed to be able to interact with these systems directly, but Marcus had learned to mimic the necessary patterns using a combination of modified human neural implants and brute force hacking techniques that would have horrified Vorthack engineers with their inelegance. The array's shutdown was almost anticlimactic. Where a Vorthack technician would have followed proper protocols, running diagnostics, and ensuring system integrity before making any changes, Marcus simply identified the primary power coupling and severed it with a plasma torch. The elegant Vorthack systems were designed to be robust and self-correcting, but they weren't designed to handle someone who approached problems with a combination of human stubbornness and complete disregard for proper procedure. Alarms immediately began blaring throughout the station. Marcus had expected this. The communication array was too important to the station's operation for its failure to go unnoticed. But the alarms also served his purpose, masking his movements and creating confusion among the Vorthack personnel who were trained to respond to systematic failures, not sabotage. He made his way toward the security center, moving through maintenance passages that took him around the station's main corridors. The Vorthack security protocols were thorough but predictable, designed to handle escaped prisoners or equipment failures, not an infiltrator who understood their systems well enough to avoid their sensors while being crude enough in his methods to confuse their diagnostic programs. The security center was located at the station's heart, a heavily armored chamber that controlled access to all critical systems. 2 guards were stationed there at all times, and the room was equipped with automated defenses that would activate if unauthorized personnel attempted to enter. Marcus had studied the schematics for 3 days, looking for a weakness in what appeared to be an impregnable position. He found his answer not in the defenses themselves, but in the Vorthack assumption that any threat would come from the corridor. The security center's ceiling was reinforced, but it shared a ventilation system with the adjacent laboratory. The ventilation shaft was too small for a Vorthack to navigate, but Marcus could fit barely. As he prepared to enter the shaft, Marcus heard the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the coordinated precision of a search team. The Vorthack had realized that their communication failure wasn't accidental, and they were beginning a systematic sweep of the station. Their search pattern would be methodical and thorough, covering every possible hiding place according to their training manuals. But Marcus wasn't hiding. He was hunting. The ventilation shaft was a tight fit, barely wide enough for his shoulders, and the metal edges scraped against his armor as he crawled forward. The shaft angled downward toward the security center, and Marcus could hear the voices of the guards below, their translated speech coming through his universal communicator in clipped, professional tones. They were discussing the communication failure, speculating about possible causes, but their conversation suggested they still believed they were dealing with equipment malfunction rather than sabotage. Marcus positioned himself directly above the security center's main console, where the duty officer sat monitoring the station systems. The ceiling panel was secured with standard Vorthack fasteners, designed to be removed for maintenance, but not intended to be accessed from above. Marcus carefully worked the fasteners loose, moving slowly to avoid making noise that might alert the guard below. The first guard died without knowing what hit him. Marcus dropped through the ceiling panel and landed directly behind the duty officer, his combat knife finding the gap between the Vorthack's exoskeleton plates with practiced precision. The second guard had time to turn and reach for his weapon, but Marcus was already moving, his human reflexes and adaptability allowing him to adjust his attack pattern in real time as the situation developed. Vorthack anatomy was different from human, but Marcus had studied their physiology extensively. Their forearm configuration gave them advantages in close combat, but their exoskeleton limited their mobility, and their vital organs were positioned differently than humans. More importantly, they were not accustomed to fighting opponents who didn't follow predictable attack patterns. The second guard managed to activate an alarm before Marcus reached him, but by then, it was too late. The security center was under human control, and Marcus had access to the entire station surveillance and control systems. For the first time since arriving at the station, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The plan was working. Through the security monitors, Marcus could see Vorthack personnel responding to the new alarm, their movements becoming more urgent as they realized they were dealing with an active threat rather than system failures. Security teams were being assembled, emergency protocols were being implemented, and the station's research operations were being suspended as all personnel were redirected to deal with the crisis. But they were still thinking like Vorthack, following their procedures and protocols, assuming their opponent would behave in rational, predictable ways. They were organizing search teams to sweep the station systematically, establishing defensive perimeters around critical areas, and implementing containment procedures designed to trap an infiltrator until reinforcements could arrive. Marcus began implementing the next phase of his plan, using the security center's access to begin shutting down non-essential systems throughout the station. Life support remained active. He needed the prisoners to survive the rescue, but artificial gravity, internal transportation systems, and automated defenses began failing one by one. Each failure forced the Vortex to divert personnel to manual control systems, spreading their response teams thinner and creating more opportunities for Marcus to move undetected. The research section where the human prisoners were held was located in the station's lower levels, accessible through a series of heavily secured checkpoints that were designed to prevent escapes. Each checkpoint was equipped with scanners that could detect the biological signatures of different species, automated weapons that would activate if unauthorized personnel attempted to pass, and redundant communication systems that would alert security if any checkpoint was compromised. Marcus studied the checkpoint layouts on the security monitors, looking for patterns and weaknesses he could exploit. The Vortex had designed their security based on the assumption that any escape attempt would be made by prisoners who lacked knowledge of the station's layout and access to its systems. They had not considered the possibility that someone might approach from the outside with full access to their security network and detailed knowledge of their procedures. The first checkpoint was the most heavily defended, equipped with the most sophisticated sensors and the heaviest weapons. But it was also the most automated, relying on computer systems rather than personnel to maintain security. Marcus began feeding false data into the checkpoint sensors, convincing them that the corridor beyond was sealed due to an atmospheric leak. The automated systems responded by locking down the checkpoint and routing security personnel around the affected area. As he worked, Marcus could hear the search teams getting closer. They were moving through the station methodically, checking every room and corridor, following search patterns that would eventually bring them to the security center. He estimated he had perhaps 20 minutes before they reached his position, 20 minutes to complete the rescue and begin the evacuation. The second checkpoint was guarded by a live sentry, a Vortex soldier who had been posted there when the alerts began. Marcus could see him on the monitors, standing at attention beside the checkpoint's control panel, his weapon ready, but his attention focused on the corridor ahead rather than the security feeds. Like his companions, he was following his training, watching for threats from expected directions while remaining blind to possibilities his instructors had never considered. Marcus began his descent toward the research levels, moving through a combination of maintenance shafts and service corridors that took him around the checkpoints entirely. The Vortex had designed their security to funnel potential escapees through specific routes where they could be contained and controlled. They had not considered that someone might simply go around their carefully planned choke points. The research section itself was a maze of laboratories and holding cells, each one equipped with monitoring equipment that tracked the vital signs and psychological state of the human subjects. Marcus forced himself to remain focused on the mission as he observed the conditions through the security feeds. The humans were being held in individual cells, subjected to various forms of psychological and physical testing that were designed to map human behavioral patterns and physiological responses. The anger that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking was pushed aside with professional discipline. Marcus had seen enough warzone atrocities to understand that emotion could get him killed, and getting himself killed would not help the prisoners. The time for anger would come later, when the humans were safe and the Vortex responsible for this facility were dead. He began identifying the prisoners who were in the best physical condition, those who would be able to move quickly during the evacuation. There were 43 humans in the research section, ranging from recently captured colonists to long-term prisoners who had been held for months. Some were in better condition than others, but all of them would need medical attention once they reached human space. The search teams were getting closer. Marcus could track their progress through the station's internal communications, hearing their reports as they cleared section after section. They were being thorough, but predictable, and their coordination was actually working against them. By communicating constantly with their command structure, they were telegraphing their positions and intentions to anyone with access to their communications network. Marcus made his decision. It was time to stop hiding and start the next phase of the operation. The Vortex were about to learn that humans didn't just adapt to other species' technology. They improved on it, modified it, and used it in ways its original designers had never imagined. He began uploading a virus into the station's computer network, a piece of malicious code that had been designed by human programmers specifically to target Vorthack systems. The virus was based on captured Vorthack software, but it had been modified using human programming principles that emphasize flexibility and adaptability over the rigid structure that characterized alien code. The virus began spreading through the station's network, causing systems to malfunction in seemingly random ways. Lights flickered, gravity fields fluctuated, and computer interfaces began responding incorrectly to commands. The failures appear to be cascade effects from the earlier communication array damage, but they were actually carefully orchestrated to create maximum confusion while avoiding critical life support systems. Marcus smiled grimly as he watched the Vorthack personnel struggling to deal with the spreading malfunctions. They were trying to diagnose and repair the problems using their standard troubleshooting procedures, but the virus had been designed to exploit the very predictability of their approach. Each attempt to fix one problem created two new ones, and their systematic methodology was actually making the situation worse. It was time to rescue the prisoners and show the galaxy what happened when they underestimated human resolve. Marcus dropped through the maintenance shaft into the research section's main corridor, landing silently on the deck plating that hummed with the station's failing power systems. The virus he had unleashed was working better than expected. Emergency lighting flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows that would mask his movement, and the environmental controls were creating random air currents that would confuse the Vorthack's sensitive atmospheric sensors. The first cell contained Dr. Sarah Martinez, a xenobiologist who had been captured during a raid on the research station Prometheus 6. Marcus had studied her file during his mission preparation. She was 43 years old, had 2 children back on Earth, and had been held by the Vorthack for 8 months. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, he could see her sitting on the cell's single metal bench, her posture suggesting someone who had not given up despite months of captivity. The cell's locking mechanism was biometrically secured, designed to respond only to authorized Vorthack personnel. But Marcus had come prepared for this obstacle, carrying a device that human intelligence had developed through careful study of captured Vorthack security systems. The device worked by mimicking the electromagnetic signature of Vorthack neural patterns, essentially convincing the lock that it was being operated by an authorized user. Dr. Martinez looked up as the cell door slid open, her expression moving through confusion, disbelief, and, finally, cautious hope as she recognized Marcus's human features. She had been conditioned by months of captivity to expect only Vorthack visitors, and the sight of another human seemed almost impossible to process. Dr. Martinez, Marcus said quietly, "I'm Marcus Chun, Human Intelligence Service. I'm here to get you and the others out." "This is impossible," she whispered, standing slowly as if afraid that sudden movement might dispel what she assumed was a hallucination. "There are no human ships in this sector. The Vorthack control everything here." "Not anymore," Marcus replied, already moving to the next cell. "I need you to help me with the other prisoners. Some of them may be in worse condition than you are, and we're going to need everyone who can move to help those who can't." The second cell contained Engineer James Park, a fusion drive specialist who had been captured when his transport was intercepted by a Vorthack patrol. Unlike Dr. Martinez, Park's eyes were bright with immediate understanding when he saw Marcus. He had clearly been planning his own escape attempt and recognized a rescue operation when he saw one. "How many of us are there?" Park asked as a cell door opened. 43 in this section," Marcus replied. "Can you walk?" "I can run if I need to," Park said, stepping out of his cell with determination that spoke well of his condition. "What do you need?" Marcus handed Park one of his backup weapons, a modified human pulse pistol that had been configured to work with captured Vorthack power cells. "Help me get the others out. Anyone who can fight, arm them. Anyone who can't fight, get them ready to move. We have maybe 15 minutes before the search teams reach this section." The third cell contained a family, 2 adults and a 12-year-old girl who had been taken during a raid on the agricultural colony New Eden. The parents, Tom and Lisa Chun, were in worse physical condition than the previous prisoners, showing signs of extended medical experimentation. Their daughter, Amy, pressed herself against her mother when she saw Marcus, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "We're going home," Marcus told them simply, knowing that complex explanations would only waste precious time. "Can you walk?" Tom Chun nodded weakly, supporting his wife as they stood. "We can manage," he said, though his voice suggested it would be an effort. "Amy, sweetheart, this man is here to help us." Marcus continued moving down the corridor, opening cells and organizing the prisoners into groups. Those who were in good physical condition were given weapons and assigned to help those who needed assistance. A command structure began emerging naturally, with Dr. Martinez taking charge of medical triage and Engineer Park coordinating the evacuation logistics. Cell after cell yielded more humans, each with their own story of capture and imprisonment. Agricultural specialists from frontier colonies, researchers from deep space stations, transport crews whose ships had been seized during routine inspections that turned into abductions. The diversity of the prisoners told a story about the scope of Vorthack operations against human space. This wasn't random piracy or opportunistic raids, but a systematic campaign to gather human subjects for study. 27 cells had been opened when Marcus encountered the first prisoner who couldn't be moved. Dr. Robert Kim, a cybernetics researcher, had been subjected to extensive neurological experimentation that had left him in a catatonic state. His body was alive and functioning, but his mind was locked away somewhere beyond reach. The sight of him triggered something cold and furious in Marcus's chest, but he forced himself to remain professional. "We're not leaving him," Dr. Martinez said firmly when she saw Marcus evaluating Dr. Kim's condition. "I wasn't planning to," Marcus replied, though he knew that carrying an unresponsive prisoner would complicate the evacuation significantly. "Park, can you and 2 others handle a stretcher?" "Already on it," Park said, having anticipated the need. He had located an emergency medical transport from the research equipment and was configuring it to carry Dr. Kim. The remaining cells yielded more prisoners in various conditions. Some, like Maria Santos, a ship's engineer, were alert and ready to fight. Others, like Professor David Wright, an archaeologist who had been captured while studying pre-human ruins, required assistance, but could still move on their own. A few were in conditions similar to Dr. Kim, requiring medical transport that would slow the entire group. As the last cell was opened, Marcus heard the sound he had been expecting, the distinctive whine of Vorthack energy weapons charging in the distance. The search teams had reached the research section, and they were no longer being subtle about their approach. The element of surprise was gone, and the rescue mission was about to become a running firefight. "Defensive positions," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command in crisis situations. "Armed personnel, cover the corridor intersections. Medical team, get the stretcher cases to the center of the group. Everyone else, stay low and stay calm." The human prisoners moved with a coordination that surprised even Marcus. Despite months of captivity and varying degrees of physical condition, they fell into defensive positions with the instinctive cooperation that characterized humanity in crisis. Those with weapons took cover behind whatever shelter they could find. Those with medical knowledge began triaging the injured, and those with engineering backgrounds started working on ways to reinforce their position. Dr. Martinez appeared at Marcus's side, having helped organize the medical evacuation of the most severely injured prisoners. "What's the extraction plan?" she asked. "Transport shuttle in the docking bay," Marcus replied, checking his weapon's power levels. "It's 3 sections away through heavily defended territory. The Vorthack know we're here now, so they'll be repositioning to block our escape routes. Then we make our own route," Engineer Park said, overhearing the conversation. "I've been studying this station's layout for months, looking for weaknesses. The Vorthack built it for efficiency, not defense against internal threats. There are maintenance tunnels, service corridors, and emergency passages that they probably don't even remember exist. The sound of approaching footsteps was getting closer, accompanied by the clicking communication sounds that Vorthack made when coordinating tactical movements. Marcus estimated they had perhaps 3 minutes before the first contact, 3 minutes to decide whether to make a stand here or attempt to move the group to a more defensible position. Park, how quickly can you get us to the docking bay through alternative routes? 20 minutes if everyone can move quickly, 40 minutes if we have to carry the stretcher cases, Park replied without hesitation. But there's a problem. The route goes through the station's environmental control section, and that's probably where they'll position their heaviest security once they realize what we're doing. The first plasma bolt seared through the air above their position, followed immediately by the harsh voice of a Vorthack security commander speaking through a translation device. The words were predictable: surrender, cooperation, consequences for resistance. Marcus had heard similar ultimatums before, always delivered with the absolute confidence of a species that had never encountered meaningful opposition. Maria. Marcus called to the ship's engineer who had taken position near the corridor intersection. What kind of weapons did they take from your ship? Standard defensive armament, she replied, ducking as another plasma bolt scorched the wall behind her. Twin pulse cannons, defensive shield generator, and a complement of mining charges for asteroid clearing. Marcus felt a predatory smile cross his face. Mining charges were essentially military explosives with industrial applications, and if the Vorthack had stored them with other captured equipment, they might provide options that his current arsenal lacked. Park, does your alternative route take us past the equipment storage areas? It can, Park replied, understanding immediately what Marcus was thinking. The main storage bay is 2 sections over, connected to the environmental control area. If they're keeping captured equipment there, we might be able to improve our situation significantly. The Vorthack security team was advancing methodically down the main corridor, using standard suppression tactics that relied on overwhelming firepower and coordinated movement. They were well-trained and disciplined, but they were also following procedures that had been developed for controlling escaped prisoners, not for dealing with an armed resistance group that understood their tactics and had nothing left to lose. Dr. Martinez had positioned herself behind an overturned research table, using a captured Vorthack weapon with the careful precision of someone who had clearly received military training at some point in her past. I count at least 6 hostiles in the main corridor, she reported. They're using standard advance and suppress tactics, but they're being cautious. I don't think they expected this level of resistance. Good, Marcus replied. Caution works in our favor. The longer they take to advance, the more time we have to prepare our next move. Amy Chun, the 12-year-old girl who had been captured with her parents, tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Mister, she whispered, I know where they keep the food stores. There's a passage behind the wall in my cell that goes to the kitchen areas. It's too small for the big aliens, but people like us could use it. Marcus looked down at the girl, struck by the calm intelligence in her eyes. 3 months of captivity hadn't broken her spirit, and she was offering tactical intelligence that could be crucial to their escape. It was a reminder of why this rescue mattered beyond the immediate strategic value. These people represented the future of human space expansion, and each one of them had something unique to contribute to humanity's survival and growth. Amy, that's excellent information. Can you show Engineer Park exactly where this passage is? The girl nodded seriously, understanding that her knowledge might help save everyone in the group. Park knelt down to listen as Amy described the hidden passage, his engineer's mind already working out how it could be integrated into their escape route. Meanwhile, the firefight in the corridor was intensifying. The Vorthack had brought up heavier weapons, and the distinctive crackling sound of plasma cannons indicated they were preparing for a major assault. Marcus counted his ammunition and evaluated their tactical situation. They could hold this position for perhaps another 10 minutes, but after that, they would be overwhelmed by superior firepower and numbers. Time to move, he decided. Park, lead the way through Amy's passage. Medical team, get the stretcher cases ready for transport. Everyone else, we're going to provide covering fire and then follow in groups. The withdrawal from the research section was conducted with the disciplined efficiency of people who understood their lives depended on cooperation and speed. The armed prisoners provided suppressing fire, while the medical team moved the injured through the hidden passage Amy had revealed. The families and non-combatants followed, and finally, the rear guard withdrew in carefully coordinated stages. The passage Amy had found led through the station's service areas, spaces designed for maintenance robots and automated systems rather than personnel. The corridors were narrow and poorly lit, but they offered concealment and alternative routes that the Vorthack security teams wouldn't anticipate. More importantly, they connected to other service areas throughout the station, providing options for movement that wouldn't appear on standard tactical maps. As they moved through the hidden areas of the station, Marcus began to understand something important about their situation. The Vorthack had built their facility to contain prisoners, but they had designed it around the assumption that any escape attempt would be made by individuals or small groups who lacked knowledge of the station's systems and layout. They had not considered the possibility that prisoners might organize into a cohesive resistance force, or that they might be aided by someone with detailed knowledge of Vorthack technology and tactics. Engineer Park led them through a maze of service tunnels and maintenance shafts, following route markers that only someone with technical training would recognize. The station's environmental systems provided both challenges and opportunities, cooling ducts that were too cold for extended travel, but could be used for short distances to avoid security checkpoints. Power conduits that were dangerous to touch, but provided electromagnetic interference that would mask their heat signatures for Vorthack sensors. 20 minutes into their movement through the service areas, they encountered their first major obstacle. The route to the equipment storage area required them to cross through a section of the station that was currently occupied by a Vorthack search team. Park had identified an alternative route, but it would add significant time to their journey and take them through areas where some of the service passages were too narrow for the stretcher cases. Dr. Martinez solved the problem with a suggestion that demonstrated the kind of lateral thinking that made humans unpredictable opponents. What if we don't go around them? What if we go through them? The plan she proposed was audacious in its simplicity. The search team was currently positioned in the station's main laboratory, a large open area with multiple entrances and exits. They were conducting a systematic sweep, but their attention was focused on obvious hiding places rather than the ceiling-mounted serviceways that provided access to the laboratory's environmental controls. The lab's atmospheric system is controlled by a manual override panel in the ceiling space, Dr. Martinez explained. If we can access it, we can flood the area with nitrogen from the fire suppression system. It won't kill them, but it will put them to sleep long enough for us to move through. It was exactly the kind of unconventional solution that human military doctrine encouraged, using the enemy's own systems against them, finding weaknesses in technologies that their designers had never considered vulnerabilities. The Vorthack would never expect prisoners to use environmental controls as weapons, primarily because such a tactic would never occur to their methodical approach to problem-solving. Marcus approved the plan, and within minutes, Engineer Park was crawling through the ceiling space above a laboratory, following Dr. Martinez's directions to locate the atmosphere controls. The Vorthack below continued their search, unaware that their quarry was literally above their heads, preparing to turn their own life support systems into a trap. The gas release was almost anticlimactic. One moment, the Vorthack search team was methodically checking equipment lockers and research stations, and the next moment they were staggering and falling unconscious as the nitrogen displaced the oxygen in the laboratory atmosphere. It was quiet, efficient, and completely outside their tactical doctrine for dealing with escaped prisoners. That, said Maria Santos as they moved through the laboratory past the unconscious Vorthack, is why I love working with humans. We cheat better than anyone else in the galaxy. The equipment storage area was a vast chamber filled with confiscated materials from dozens of captured human vessels. Personal effects, technical equipment, weapons, and industrial supplies were sorted and cataloged with typical Vorthack thoroughness. But The organization that made the storage area efficient for Vorthack use also made it easy for humans to locate what they needed. Marcus found the mining charges in a section labeled Industrial Explosives, Human Origin, stored with the methodical care that Vorthack applied to everything they considered potentially useful. There were enough charges to level a significant portion of the station, but Marcus had more subtle applications in mind. Properly placed, the charges could create diversions, clear blocked passages, or disable critical systems without causing catastrophic structural damage. Engineer Park located a cache of human-manufactured tools and technical equipment that included portable power generators, communication devices, and fabrication equipment that could be used to modify their weapons and equipment. Dr. Martinez found medical supplies that included both human and Vorthack pharmaceuticals, some of which could be used to treat the injured prisoners more effectively than basic first aid. But the most significant discovery was made by Maria Santos, who found her ship's communication equipment stored in pristine condition in a section dedicated to navigation and communication systems. The equipment included an Ensemble transmitter capable of faster-than-light communication, which meant they could contact human space directly and call for extraction support. "How long to set up the transmitter?" Marcus asked. 20 minutes if we can find a good transmission point, Maria replied, already beginning to assemble the equipment. "But we'll need to get to the station's communication array to boost the signal enough for interstellar transmission." Marcus considered their tactical situation. The communication array was in the upper section of the station, the same area where he had disabled their original communication systems. Getting there would require moving through heavily patrolled areas, but it would also give them the ability to call for help and coordinate with human forces. The decision was made easier by a new development: the sound of additional ships arriving in the system. Through the station's external sensors, Marcus could see 3 Vorthack patrol vessels taking up positions around the mining facility. The hegemony was reinforcing their position, which meant time was running out for a quiet extraction. "Change of plans," Marcus announced to the group. "We're going to take control of this station." The announcement that they were going to seize control of an entire Vorthack space station was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a dozen voices all speaking at once. Some expressed disbelief, others asked practical questions about implementation, and a few simply accepted the plan with the grim determination of people who had already lost everything except their lives. Marcus raised his hand for quiet, and the group fell silent with the discipline that had emerged naturally during their escape from the research section. "I know it sounds impossible," he said, "but consider our alternatives. 3 Vorthack patrol ships have just arrived in the system, which means they're planning to board this station with a full military complement. We can't escape in a stolen shuttle against that kind of firepower, and we can't hide here indefinitely." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly, her scientific mind working through the tactical implications. "What you're suggesting is that our best defense is offense. Take control of the station's systems, use its weapons against the patrol ships, and hold position until human forces can respond to our distress call." "Exactly," Marcus replied. "But it's more than just tactics. The Vorthack are about to learn that humans don't retreat when cornered. We attack. They've been treating us like test subjects, but they're about to discover what happens when the test subjects start running the experiment." Engineer Park was already studying the station schematics he had memorized during his captivity, his mind shifting from escape routes to offensive possibilities. "The station has defensive weapons," he said thoughtfully. "Plasma cannon arrays, missile launchers, and a shield generator that's designed to protect against asteroid impacts. If we can reach the command center and take control of those systems, then we turn their own weapons against them," completed Maria Santos, her engineer's instincts recognizing the elegance of the solution. "The patrol ships won't expect the station to open fire on them. They'll be positioned for a boarding operation, not a space battle." Amy Chun, the 12-year-old who had provided crucial intelligence about the hidden passages, raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Marcus, what about the aliens who are still on the station?" There are lots of them, and they have guns. It was a valid question that went to the heart of their tactical situation. The station's crew consisted of 37 Vorthak, most of whom were researchers and technicians rather than military personnel, but they were still armed and trained to deal with emergencies. More importantly, they knew the station's layout better than the human prisoners, and they had access to communication systems that could coordinate with the incoming patrol ships. We turned that against them, too, Marcus said, his plan taking shape as he spoke. The Vorthak think like Vorthak. They're methodical, hierarchical, and they follow procedures. We're going to use their own organizational structure to defeat them. The first step was to capture the station's command center, which required moving through 3 sections of corridor that were currently under Vorthak control. But instead of fighting their way through, Marcus proposed a more subtle approach that exploited the aliens' reliance on their technological systems and rigid command structure. Using the equipment they had recovered from storage, Engineer Park and Dr. Martinez began assembling a portable electronic warfare package that could interfere with Vorthak communications and sensor systems. The device was essentially a sophisticated jamming system, but it was designed to create specific types of interference that would convince the Vorthak that their equipment was malfunctioning rather than being attacked. Meanwhile, Maria Santos worked on modifying the Ensemble transmitter to broadcast on Vorthak communication frequencies. Her plan was to create false status reports that would convince different sections of the station that other areas were under control, buying them time to move through the facility without encountering organized resistance. The psychological aspect of their plan was as important as the technical components. The Vorthak had been studying human behavior for months, but they had been studying humans as subjects, not as opponents. They understood human physiology and psychology in clinical terms, but they didn't understand human tactics, adaptability, or the way humans performed under pressure. Dr. Martinez had observed something during her months of captivity that would prove crucial to their success. The Vorthak researchers follow strict protocols for everything, she explained. They never deviate from established procedures, and they assume that any situation can be handled by applying the correct response from their training manuals. But humans don't appear in their training manuals as anything other than test subjects. This observation led to a key element of Marcus's plan. Rather than attempting to overpower the Vorthak through direct confrontation, they would create situations that their rigid thinking couldn't process effectively. They would be unpredictable, adaptive, and creative in ways that would force the aliens to respond to scenarios they had never trained for. The first test of their approach came when they encountered a Vorthak security patrol in the corridor leading to the command section. The patrol consisted of 4 armed guards moving in standard formation, following a route that would take them past the prisoner's position in approximately 3 minutes. Instead of avoiding the patrol or preparing for a firefight, Marcus implemented a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. Using the jamming equipment to disrupt the guards' communications and Maria's modified transmitter to send false reports, they convinced the patrol that they were responding to an emergency in a completely different section of the station. The Vorthak guards received what appeared to be urgent orders from their command center, directing them to investigate a reported hull breach in the mining operations area. The orders came through normal communication channels, used proper authorization codes, and followed standard emergency protocols. The guards had no reason to doubt their authenticity, and they immediately changed course to respond to the supposed crisis. That was almost too easy, Park commented as they watched the patrol disappear around a distant corner. That's the point, Marcus replied. They trust their systems completely because those systems have never failed them before. They can't conceive of someone using their own technology against them in ways their designers never intended. The command center was located at the heart of the station, behind multiple security barriers and protected by automated defenses that would activate if unauthorized personnel attempted to enter. Under normal circumstances, it would be completely inaccessible to anyone without the proper authorization codes and biometric identification. But circumstances were far from normal, and the human prisoners had advantages that the station's designers had never considered. Amy Chin's knowledge of hidden passages provided a route that bypassed the main security checkpoints. Dr. Martinez's medical expertise allowed her to analyze the biometric scanners and devise ways to fool them using biological samples from unconscious Vorthack personnel. Engineer Park's technical knowledge enabled him to understand the automated defense systems well enough to find their weaknesses. The defense systems were sophisticated but predictable, designed to respond to specific threats in predetermined ways. They could detect unauthorized personnel, track movement patterns, and engage targets with lethal efficiency. But they were not programmed to deal with opponents who understood their operating parameters and could exploit their limitations. Park discovered that the automated defenses had blind spots in their coverage, areas where the installation of environmental systems had created sensor shadows that the original designers had accepted as unavoidable. By moving through these blind spots and using jamming equipment to confuse the sensors, the human team was able to approach the command center without triggering the automated response protocols. The final barrier was the command center's door, a heavily armored portal that required both biometric identification and numerical authorization codes to open. It was designed to be absolutely secure against any conceivable threat, and under normal circumstances, it would have been impossible for unauthorized personnel to gain access. But Dr. Martinez had spent months being escorted through various sections of the station for medical examinations, and she had observed the security procedures used by different levels of Vorthack personnel. She had memorized not only the numerical sequences used by research staff, but also the behavioral patterns and timing that characterized different levels of authorization. Using biological samples collected from the unconscious guards in the laboratory and combining them with Park's technical modifications to the scanner systems, they were able to create authorization signatures that convinced the command center security systems that they were legitimate personnel responding to the various emergencies that their jamming and false communications had created throughout the station. The command center door slid open with the quiet efficiency that characterized all Vorthack technology, revealing a circular chamber filled with control stations and monitoring equipment. 3 Vorthack technicians were present, working frantically to coordinate responses to the multiple crises that were being reported from different sections of the station. The technicians looked up in confusion as humans entered their secured command center, their minds struggling to process a situation that had no precedent in their training or experience. They had been dealing with equipment malfunctions, communication failures, and emergency reports for the past hour, but the sight of armed human prisoners in their most secure facility was something their protocols had never prepared them for. Marcus and his team moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, securing the technicians and taking control of the command stations before the aliens could react effectively. The Vorthack were not cowards, but they were researchers and support personnel, not combat troops, and they surrendered without resistance when faced with determined human opponents who clearly knew what they were doing. "Maria, get that transmitter connected to the station's communication array," Marcus ordered. "Dr. Martinez, see if you can access their medical databases. I want to know exactly what they've been doing to human prisoners." "Park, start familiarizing yourself with the weapons control systems." The command center provided access to every system on the station, from life support and environmental controls to defensive weapons and communication arrays. More importantly, it provided real-time information about the approaching Vorthack patrol ships and their tactical dispositions. The 3 patrol vessels had taken up standard positions for a boarding operation, with one ship docked directly to the station's primary airlock and the other 2 positioned to provide covering fire and prevent any escape attempts. Their formation was textbook perfect for dealing with a disabled station or conducting a prisoner transfer, but it was extremely vulnerable to attack from the station's own defensive weapons. Engineer Park studied the weapons control interface with the intense concentration of someone whose life depended on understanding alien technology quickly and completely. The station's defensive systems were impressive. Plasma cannon arrays capable of crippling a patrol ship with a single sustained burst, missile launchers loaded with high-explosive warheads, and a shield generator that could protect the facility from retaliatory strikes. The good news is that these systems are designed to be operated by Vorthack technicians, which means they're highly automated and relatively simple to control, Park reported. The bad news is that they're currently programmed to recognize the patrol ships as friendly vessels, so we'll need to override their identification systems before we can target them. Dr. Martinez had accessed the medical databases and was reviewing the experimental records with growing anger. The files contained detailed documentation of every procedure that had been performed on human subjects, including psychological profiles, physiological responses, and planned future experiments. The scope of the research was both comprehensive and horrifying. They've been trying to understand human adaptability, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. They want to know how humans can integrate alien technology so quickly, how we can modify systems in ways their original designers never intended, and how we can function effectively in environments that should be completely alien to us. And now they're about to get a practical demonstration, Marcus replied grimly. Maria Santos had successfully connected the Ensemble transmitter to the station's communication array and was establishing contact with human space. The signal would take time to reach the nearest human military installation, but once it arrived, it would provide precise coordinates and tactical information that could guide a rescue operation. Message transmitted, she reported. But it'll be at least 6 hours before we can expect any response, and probably 12 hours before any ships could reach us. Then, we hold this station for 12 hours, Marcus said with finality. Park, how long before you can retarget those weapons systems? Give me 10 minutes, Park replied, his hands moving across the Vorthack control interface with increasing confidence. Their authorization protocols are sophisticated, but they follow logical patterns. Once I understand the structure, I should be able to convince the system that the patrol ships have been reclassified as hostile targets. The next few minutes were crucial. Throughout the station, Vorthack personnel were beginning to realize that their communication problems were not random equipment failures, and they were starting to coordinate more effective responses to what they now understood was an organized escape attempt. The patrol ships were preparing to send boarding parties to reinforce the station's security forces, and their commanders were growing suspicious about the lack of communication from the facility. Dr. Martinez monitored the station's internal communication channels, tracking the movement of Vorthack security teams and identifying potential threats to their position. The aliens were beginning to focus their search efforts on the command center, understanding that whoever was responsible for the security breaches would need access to the station's primary control systems. We've got multiple teams converging on our position, she reported. Estimated 15 minutes before they reach the command center's outer perimeter. That's all the time we need, Marcus replied, watching as Park's fingers danced over the weapons control interface. The transformation of the station's defensive systems from Guardian to Attacker was accomplished through a series of authorization overrides and system modifications that would have horrified Vorthack engineers with their elegant simplicity. Park essentially convinced the computer systems that a state of emergency existed that required immediate defensive action against unidentified vessels that were approaching without proper clearance codes. The first indication that their plan was working came when the station's plasma cannon arrays began tracking the patrol ships, their targeting systems locking onto what they now identified as potential threats. The Vorthack commanders aboard the patrol vessels would be seeing warning indicators on their tactical displays, alerts that their ships were being painted by hostile targeting systems. Targeting solutions acquired, Park reported with satisfaction. All weapon systems are online and ready to fire on your command. Marcus looked around the command center at the group of former prisoners who had somehow managed to seize control of an enemy space station through a combination of human ingenuity, adaptive thinking, and sheer determination. Dr. Martinez was monitoring communication channels with the calm professionalism of someone who had found her purpose. Engineer Park was managing weapon systems that he had never seen before with the intuitive understanding that made humans dangerous opponents. Maria Santos was coordinating their communications with human space while simultaneously tracking the approach of enemy reinforcements. And in a few minutes, 3 Vorthack patrol ships were about to discover what it meant to underestimate human resolve. All stations, prepare for combat, Marcus announced. Let's show the galaxy how humans respond when they're cornered. The first plasma cannon burst caught the lead Vorthack patrol ship completely by surprise. The vessel's shields flared brilliant blue-white as they absorbed the initial impact, but the station's weapons were designed to deal with asteroids and mining equipment, not provide warning shots. The second burst overloaded the ship's defensive systems entirely, sending cascades of electrical discharge across its hull as critical systems began failing. Inside the command center, Engineer Park watched his targeting displays with the intense focus of someone who understood that precision meant the difference between rescue and annihilation. First target's shields are down, he reported. Their engines are showing power fluctuations, and I'm detecting atmospheric venting from their port side. The Vorthack patrol ships were designed for system defense and prisoner transport, not fleet combat against heavily armed installations. Their commanders had positioned themselves for a routine boarding operation, never considering that the mining station itself might become a hostile combatant. Now, they were caught in the worst possible tactical situation, too close to maneuver effectively, but too far away to launch an immediate boarding assault. Incoming transmission from the patrol ship commander, Maria Santos, reported from the communication station. They're demanding our immediate surrender and threatening to destroy the facility if we don't comply within 60 seconds. Marcus considered the threat carefully. The patrol ships certainly had the firepower to destroy the mining station, but doing so would mean sacrificing the human prisoners who were supposedly the reason for their presence. More importantly, destroying the facility would require them to explain to their superiors why a routine prisoner transfer had resulted in the loss of a valuable research installation. Tell them we'll consider their terms, Marcus replied. But first, we want to discuss the conditions of surrender with their senior commander. It was a delaying tactic, but it was also something more, an opportunity to demonstrate to the Vorthack that humans could be reasonable negotiators when circumstances permitted. The goal was not to actually surrender, but to create confusion and uncertainty among the enemy commanders while the station's weapons systems continued targeting their ships. Dr. Martinez had been monitoring the internal security situation and reported new developments that complicated their tactical position. The Vorthack security teams have reached the command center's outer perimeter, she said. They're setting up some kind of cutting equipment to breach the security barriers. I estimate 20 minutes before they can force entry. More than enough time, Marcus replied, though privately he was calculating multiple contingencies for what would happen if they lost control of the command center before human reinforcements could arrive. The second patrol ship attempted to maneuver away from the station's weapons, but its movement brought it into the targeting range of a different cannon array. Park's understanding of the weapon systems had evolved from basic operation to tactical expertise in the span of minutes, demonstrating the kind of rapid learning that made humans unpredictable opponents. Second target is trying to gain maneuvering distance, Park reported, but they're moving into the engagement envelope of the secondary weapons array. I can maintain targeting solutions on all 3 ships regardless of their position. The space battle that ensued was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Traditional fleet engagements involve ships of roughly equivalent capability maneuvering for tactical advantage over vast distances. This was a point defense action where a stationary installation was engaging patrol craft at close range, using weapons that had never been intended for ship-to-ship combat. The Vorthack commanders found themselves facing a tactical nightmare. They couldn't retreat without abandoning their mission and explaining their failure to higher authority. They couldn't advance without exposing themselves to devastating fire from weapon systems that were far more powerful than their ship's defenses could handle. And they couldn't call for reinforcements without admitting that they had lost control of what should have been a routine operation. Third patrol ship is launching boarding pods, Dr. Martinez announced, monitoring the tactical displays. 4 pods, each carrying approximately 8 personnel. Estimated arrival time at our docking ports in 6 minutes. Marcus had anticipated this development. The Vorthack commanders were attempting to solve their tactical problem by bypassing the space battle entirely and focusing on retaking control of the station through direct assault. It was a logical response that played to their strengths: superior numbers, better armor, and more advanced personal weapons. But it was also exactly the kind of predictable thinking that Marcus had been counting on. Amy, he called to the 12-year-old girl who had been quietly observing the battle from a corner of the command center. Remember those hidden passages you showed us? Do any of them connect to the docking bays? The girl's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes, sir. There's a whole network of maintenance tunnels that go everywhere the robots need to go. The big aliens never use them because they're too small. Perfect. Dr. Martinez, take Amy and 3 volunteers. Get to those docking bays and give our visitors a reception they won't expect. The beauty of the plan lay in its exploitation of Vorthack assumptions about human capabilities and tactics. The boarding teams would be expecting resistance at the docking bays, but they would be prepared for conventional defensive positions, armed guards behind cover, maybe some hastily constructed barriers. They would not be expecting the docking bays themselves to become weapons. Dr. Martinez led her small team through the maintenance tunnels that Amy guided them through, carrying mining charges and improvised explosive devices that Engineer Park had assembled from materials in the equipment storage area. Their target was not the Vorthack boarding teams themselves, but the docking bays, atmospheric, and structural systems. Meanwhile, in the command center, Park continued his methodical destruction of the patrol ship's defensive capabilities. The third ship had launched its boarding pods, but the act of doing so had required it to drop its defensive screens and expose its weapons systems to direct fire. Park took full advantage of the opportunity. Third target's main weapons array is offline, he reported with satisfaction. They've got hull breaches in 3 sections, and their life support systems are showing critical failures. The Vorthack patrol commanders were beginning to understand that they were not facing escaped prisoners armed with improvised weapons, but a coordinated military operation conducted by personnel who understood their systems better than they understood them themselves. The realization was both tactically significant and psychologically devastating. They were being defeated by the very species they had been studying as inferior subjects. Boarding teams have reached the docking bays, Maria Santos reported, monitoring the internal security feeds. They're preparing to cut through the airlock doors. Dr. Martinez, are you in position? Marcus asked through the communication system. Affirmative, came the reply from the docking bay area. Charges are set and ready. Just give us the word. Marcus waited until the Vorthack boarding teams had committed themselves fully to breaching the airlock doors before giving the command. The explosion that followed was carefully calculated to disable the docking bays without causing catastrophic decompression that would endanger the human prisoners elsewhere in the station. The result was devastating for the boarding teams. The blast didn't kill them outright, but it sealed them inside the compromised docking bays with failing life support systems and no way to retreat to their ships. They were trapped in a hostile environment, dependent on their limited suit reserves and cut off from reinforcement or evacuation. Boarding teams neutralized, Dr. Martinez reported. The docking bays are sealed and venting atmosphere, but the rest of the station is secure. The patrol ship commanders were now facing a complete tactical disaster. Their ships were crippled, their boarding teams were trapped, and the facility they had come to secure was under the control of human prisoners who had demonstrated both technical competence and tactical sophistication that contradicted everything in their intelligence files. Incoming priority transmission, Maria Santos announced. It's not from the patrol ships. This is coming from somewhere else in the system. The transmission proved to be from a Vorthack heavy cruiser that had been responding to the station's original distress call. The ship's commander was demanding a full situation report and threatening severe consequences if the patrol ship commanders couldn't provide adequate explanations for their failure to secure a simple mining facility. Marcus realized that the situation was about to escalate beyond a local tactical engagement. The arrival of a heavy cruiser meant that the Vorthack were committing significant military resources to what they had initially considered a minor security incident. More importantly, it meant that word of the human resistance was spreading through Vorthack command channels. "Park, what kind of firepower does a Vorthack heavy cruiser carry?" Marcus asked. "Enough to destroy this station 10 times over," Park replied grimly. "The mining facility's weapons are impressive against patrol ships, but they won't even scratch a military cruiser's main shields." The tactical situation had changed completely. What had begun as a rescue operation had become a siege, and now was about to become a space battle between forces of vastly different capabilities. The human prisoners had successfully seized control of the station and disabled 3 patrol ships, but their ultimate survival depended on factors beyond their immediate control. Dr. Martinez returned to the command center with her team, reporting that the docking bays were secure and the trapped Vorthack boarding teams were requesting medical assistance for several injured personnel. It was a reminder that even in the midst of their desperate fight for survival, they were dealing with intelligent beings who had their own hopes, fears, and desires to live. "What do we do about the injured aliens?" Dr. Martinez asked. It was a question that went to the heart of what separated humans from their captors. The Vorthack had treated human prisoners as experimental subjects, valuable only for the data they could provide. But humans, even in the extremity of combat, retained their capacity for mercy and their recognition of the fundamental value of life. Provide medical assistance. Marcus decided without hesitation. "We're fighting for our freedom, not conducting a genocide. If they're willing to surrender, we'll treat them according to the human standards for prisoners of war." The decision had practical as well as moral implications. Treating captured Vorthack personnel humanely would demonstrate to their commanders that humans could be reasonable opponents who followed recognized rules of warfare. It might create opportunities for negotiation that wouldn't exist if the aliens believed they were facing an extermination campaign. More immediately, it would provide intelligence about Vorthack military capabilities and intentions that could be crucial for planning their defense against the approaching heavy cruiser. The interrogation of the captured boarding team leader revealed information that changed Marcus's understanding of their strategic situation. The Vorthack response to the station incident was not simply about recovering escaped prisoners or maintaining security at a research facility. It was about preventing the spread of information that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. "They're afraid," Dr. Martinez reported after conducting the interrogation. The boarding team leader kept talking about contamination protocols and information security procedures. "I think the experiments they've been conducting on human prisoners have revealed something that their government considers dangerous." The revelation put their entire situation in a new perspective. The Vorthack had not been studying humans simply to satisfy scientific curiosity or to evaluate them as potential threats. They had been trying to understand something about human capabilities that had implications far beyond the immediate military situation. They've discovered something about human adaptability that scares them, Marcus realized. Something that threatens their understanding of how technological civilizations are supposed to develop. Engineer Park looked up from the weapons console, where he had been monitoring the approach of the heavy cruiser. That would explain why they're sending a military cruiser to deal with a few escaped prisoners. "This isn't about us anymore. It's about preventing other species from learning what humans can do." The approaching Vorthack heavy cruiser represented more than just a tactical threat. It represented the response of an ancient galactic civilization that was beginning to understand that humanity's rapid adaptation to alien technology was not simply impressive. It was revolutionary in ways that could destabilize the existing order of power in the galaxy. Maria Santos announced that she was receiving response signals from human space. The Ensemble transmission had reached its destination, and human military forces were responding to their emergency call. But the nearest human fleet was still 8 hours away, and the Vorthak heavy cruiser would arrive within 2 hours. We need to hold this position for 6 more hours than we have reinforcement capability for. Marcus summarized their tactical situation. Against an opponent with overwhelming firepower advantage and no reason to show mercy. Then, we make them pay such a high price for this station that they'll think twice before underestimating humans again, Dr. Martinez said with quiet determination. The former prisoners began preparing for what might be their final battle, but they were no longer thinking like victims or escapees. They were thinking like soldiers defending their species' future, and they were about to teach the galaxy that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The Vorthak heavy cruiser Inevitable Dominion dropped out of hyperspace with the kind of precision that characterized everything about the ancient race's military doctrine. Commander Zethkar had been personally selected for this mission by the Hegemony Council itself, chosen not just for his tactical expertise, but for his reputation as someone who could handle delicate situations that required both overwhelming force and political sensitivity. What he found waiting for him in the Kepler 442b system defied every tactical assumption in his considerable experience. 3 patrol ships hung dead in space, their hulls breached, and their crews either dead or trapped aboard the mining station that should have been under hegemony control. The station itself was not only active but appeared to be fully operational, its defensive systems tracking his cruiser with the kind of precision that suggested experienced military operators rather than escaped prisoners. Tactical analysis. Zethkar commanded from his position on the cruiser's bridge, his 4 arms moving across control surfaces with a fluid grace that came from decades of command experience. The mining station's defensive systems have been modified, his weapons officer reported. Power output is consistent with full military operation. Targeting solutions are being maintained on our position, and preliminary scans suggest significant improvements to the basic installation design. It was impossible. Mining stations were not military installations, and escaped prisoners did not possess the technical knowledge required to operate complex defensive systems. More importantly, humans were not supposed to understand Vorthak technology well enough to modify it in ways that improved its performance. Communication from the station, his signals officer announced. They're requesting to speak with our senior commander. Zethkar considered his options. Standard protocol for dealing with escaped prisoners was to destroy their position immediately and recover whatever remained for analysis. But the political implications of this situation went far beyond simple prisoner control. The Hegemony Council had been very specific about the need to understand exactly how humans had accomplished what appeared to be impossible. Open communication channel, he decided. The human who appeared on his display screen was not what Zethkar had expected. Instead of the desperate, pleading prisoner he anticipated, he saw a calm, professional military officer who carried himself with the confidence of someone who held the tactical advantage. Commander Zethkar, the human said, somehow knowing his name despite the fact that no introductions have been made. I'm Marcus Chun, representing the human prisoners currently in control of this facility. We need to discuss terms for the peaceful resolution of this situation. The presumption was staggering. A human prisoner was offering to negotiate with a hegemony military commander as if they were equals dealing from positions of comparable strength. It was either madness or a level of tactical confidence that suggested capabilities the hegemony had never suspected. You are in no position to negotiate, Zethkar replied with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. You will surrender immediately and submit to hegemony justice, or you will be destroyed. That's certainly an option, Marcus Chin agreed with disturbing equanimity. But before you make that decision, you should probably review the data we've been transmitting to your ship for the past 3 minutes. Zethkar's tactical officer confirmed that the station was indeed broadcasting information on standard hegemony frequencies, using proper communication protocols and encryption methods that prisoners should not have been able to access. More disturbing, The data appear to be detailed technical specifications for hegemony military systems, including some that were classified at levels that required council authorization to access. How did you obtain this information? Zitkar demanded. We didn't obtain it, Marcus replied. We developed it. Your research teams have been studying human adaptability for months, trying to understand how we integrate alien technology so effectively. What they discovered is that we don't just learn your systems, we improve them. The data stream continued, showing modifications to Vorthack technology that increased efficiency, reduced power consumption, and enhanced performance in ways that hegemony engineers had never considered. Each improvement was small, but collectively they represented a fundamental advancement in technological capability that had implications far beyond the immediate military situation. The modifications you're seeing represent just the beginning of what humans can accomplish when given access to advanced technology. Marcus continued. Your researchers documented everything, and we've been very careful to preserve their data. When human forces arrive to extract us, this information will become part of our technical database. Zethkar realized that he was facing a completely unprecedented situation. The humans had not simply escaped from captivity. They had turned their imprisonment into an opportunity to acquire advanced technology and demonstrate capabilities that threaten the basic assumptions underlying hegemony policy toward younger civilizations. What do you want? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Safe passage for all human prisoners aboard this station, immediate cessation of hegemony raids on human settlements, and formal recognition that humanity is not available for experimental study, Marcus replied. In exchange, we'll provide you with detailed information about the vulnerabilities in your systems that made our escape possible. It was blackmail, but it was also something more sophisticated, a negotiation between powers that recognized each other's capabilities and limitations. Marcus Chun was not pleading for mercy or threatening desperate resistance. He was conducting diplomacy from a position of demonstrated strength. The tactical situation was more complex than Zethkar had initially realized. His ship could certainly destroy the mining station, but doing so would also destroy the technical data that the hegemony desperately needed to understand. More importantly, it would provide conclusive proof to the human military forces that were undoubtedly responding to emergency transmissions that the hegemony was willing to commit genocide rather than acknowledge human capabilities. You have 30 minutes to consider our terms, Marcus announced, and then terminated the communication before Zethkar could respond. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also tactically sound. By setting a deadline, the human commander was forcing Zethkar to make decisions under pressure while simultaneously demonstrating that he was not intimidated by overwhelming odds. More importantly, he was communicating that humans were willing to fight to the death rather than accept continued subjugation. Zethkar opened a priority communication channel to the Hegemony Council, knowing that the decision he was facing had implications that went far beyond his authority to resolve. The political implications of the situation were staggering. The hegemony had built its power structure on the assumption that older civilizations were inherently superior to younger ones, and that technological development followed predictable patterns that could be controlled and managed. Humans were proving that both assumptions were dangerously incorrect. While Zethkar waited for instructions from his superiors, Marcus Chun and his team were making final preparations for what they all understood might be their last stand. The captured Vorthack personnel had been moved to secure locations where they would be protected if the station came under bombardment, and the human prisoners who were too injured to fight had been positioned in the most heavily shielded sections of the facility. Engineer Park had used the time to implement additional modifications to the station's defensive systems, incorporating design improvements that he had developed during their study of captured Vorthack technology. The weapons that had been designed to deal with asteroids and mining equipment now incorporated targeting algorithms that were optimized for space combat, power management systems that increased their effective range, and cooling mechanisms that allowed for sustained fire without system degradation. Dr. Martinez had been working with the medical data they had recovered from the Vorthack research files, analyzing not just the experiments that had been conducted on human subjects, but the conclusions that Vorthack scientists had drawn from their observations. The information painted a picture of systematic study that had been designed to understand every aspect of human physiology, psychology, and social organization. They weren't just studying us for scientific curiosity, she reported. They were evaluating us as a potential threat to the